Okay, good evening, everyone. We just want to welcome you all. If you can turn on your cameras, it's much more fun for a speaker to see who they're speaking to as opposed to talking to a bunch of names on a screen. So we encourage you guys to please turn on your cameras and join us. There we go. Thank you, Alvin and Tamara. We appreciate your joining. We are going to ask so that people stay on mute until or unless our speaker invites people to unmute themselves. We just don't want anybody talking about dinner by accident online. So I'm going to take the opportunity to introduce myself and introduce our guest speaker tonight. I'm Eliza Abrams-Koenig. I'm the Director of Student Leadership at the Sacks-Herenstein Center. It's wonderful to be here with all of you tonight. And tonight is the third and final part of our online series, our pre-Shavuot program. And we're very excited that Rabbi Dr. Dovid Bashevkin is going to be speaking tonight. Dovid is actually a scholar in residence at the center this year, which has been really wonderful and special getting to know him and to learn from him. But outside of that role, Dovid is the founder of 1840, a really great podcast. If you haven't heard of it or you haven't listened to it, I highly encourage you to tune in and listen. He's also the director of education for NCSY and a clinical assistant professor of Jewish values at the Sims School of Business at YU. He has his smicha from YU from REITs, and he has his master's degree from Revel. And he's done lots of really interesting things. His PhD is actually in public policy and management from the New School. And he's a sought after speaker and lecturer and teacher and just a really also a very funny person. So hopefully you'll find that you learn a lot tonight and you also probably will laugh a little, but I don't know because maybe it's a serious topic. But either way, I'm going to turn the floor over to Dovid Bashevkin. Thank you again so much for joining us. Actually, I want to say one more thing. I'm so sorry. Tomorrow, for those of you who are local, I don't know where everybody lives, but tomorrow in Teaneck, the Sacks-Herenstein Center is hosting a full-day leadership development conference. If anybody's interested in learning more, Dovid will actually be recording a live podcast interviewing Mr. Moish Bain. Dr. Erica Brown will be giving a Beit Midrash hour in the beginning of the day. And in the middle, we're having this wonderful speaker, Diana Bloom, who's going to be talking about accountability. Dr. Brown's Beit Midrash is going to be about what Torah and Judaism talk about in terms of time management and accountability. So if you want to learn more about that, you can go to yu.edu/SacksPD. I'll put that into the chat. And I'm also going to put the link to Rabbi Bashevkin's source sheet now. And without further ado, I will now turn the floor over to Rabbi Bashevkin.
Thank you so much, Eliza. I hope everyone can hear me, and it is so exciting to be sharing some Torah with you tonight. We picked out this topic around, I think, 6 weeks ago. Why wasn't the Torah given in Israel? And it originally had a fancy subtitle about Messianism, Sabbatianism, and Zionism. I changed the subtitle. I hope no one is disappointed because literally today, when I was starting to put together what I was going to talk about, I went online and I knew Franz Kafka, the great writer, novelist, and thinker. I knew he died in the summertime, and for some reason, I was like, when exactly did he die? And I checked online. It was June 3rd, 1924. And I said, wow, that's pretty close to where we are now. And I then just looked up what was the Hebrew date corresponding to that. And I was genuinely shocked when I saw it was today, Aleph Sivan, which was the daytime today. It'll be Beis Sivan tonight. Tuf Reish Pei Daled, which was 1924. He died really less than a week before Shavuos. And I thought it would be apropos because I was already speaking about why wasn't the Torah given in Israel. Why not use the Torah, really, of Franz Kafka, who really has his own approach to this very question, to explore and get ready for the holy day of Shavuos, the day where we celebrate the giving of the Torah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of God's revelation to the Jewish people. So I want to begin. It would be helpful if you have the source sheets, because I have a lot of really fascinating sources. Everything I'm going to read, of course, I will translate. There's not so many, but a couple Hebrew sources. And then there's some really interesting readings about Kafka and why specifically tonight I think it is appropriate to talk about him, aside from just being his yard site, as really a preparation for Shavuos itself. So let's begin. If you have the source sheets open, you can look. The first source we have is from the Mechilta
Sorry,
of Rebbe.
excuse me, Rabbi Bashevkin. If you want to share a screen and put up so people can look along with you, you can also do that. You have the ability to share
Oh,
screen.
that's very exciting. I would love to do that.
Great, thank
I
you.
would love to do that. I could do that on my screen. Yes. Hold on one moment. Hide blur background. I think you might have to make me co-host in order for me to do that. Let's see.
Do that, but I think everybody can share. Hold on, let's do that.
I got it. I got it. Here we go.
Great,
Okay. Do you see this now?
perfect.
Beautiful. Okay, you could follow along with me. The first source that I'd like to bring up is the source that really asked this question explicitly. In Mechilta de Rebbe Yishmael of Yisro, which is the first Hebrew source, it reads as follows: Umipnei ma, for what reason lo nitna Torah be'eretz Yisrael? Why wasn't the Torah given after they entered Eretz Yisrael? Let's build the land and then we'll get the Torah. Says the Medrash, Shalolito Pischon Peh Le'umos Ha'olam. It is in order that Gentiles of the world do not have the response, are not able to say, Lomar, Lefisha Nitna Torah Ba'arzo, because the Torah was given in our land, Lefichach Lo Kibalnu Aleinu. That's the reason why we did not accept it. If the Torah was given in Israel, we would have had this notion that God's revelation was specifically for the Jews in Israel. So then not any other Gentile will say, look, why do we have to follow the Torah? We live in France. We live in Africa. We live in Europe. We don't live in the land of Israel. We're hundreds of miles away. That is the first answer given. I want to skip now to the Abarbanel. The Abarbanel also deals with this question. And he really articulates and fleshes out the depth of this question. He says as follows: Hashe'ela habez. The second question he has, and this is all questions, if you look, this is the Abarbanel at the beginning of the giving of the Torah in the 19th chapter of Shemos, the first pasuk. This is right at the beginning of the story that we are celebrating on Shavuos of the giving of the Torah. And he says, the second question that I have, mitzad hamakom, the place where God gave the Torah. Lama nitna haTorah b'midbar Sin u'bahar Sinai. Why was the Torah given in the desert at Sinai? V'lama lo nitna b'Mitzrayim. Give it earlier. Give it in Egypt. Kishalakach Hashem ha'am lavodaso v'hitchil lases lam Torah mitzvos. Give it to us before we reach the desert. At least give it to us in an inhabited land. He already started giving the Jewish people commandments, and he lists a bunch of them. Mitzvahs HaChodesh, which we got right after we left Mitzrayim, of sanctifying the new moon. Mitzvah V'Isser HaChometz, and some of the laws about Pesach. The Gamlo b'Mara, God didn't give it to us when we went to Mara. Kishanasar Eleha Shabbos V'Dineha. So he kept on not giving us the Torah. Why did he leaves with these questions, the last words, V'lama Bachar Imkain B'Midbar Sinai? Why specifically in the desert, in the Sinai desert, is where God is giving the Torah? The last person who I want to address who deals with this is a thinker who some of you may be familiar with. He's a fascinating thinker. I think one of the most important Jewish thinkers of the last 50 years. You could ask yourself, in the last 50 years, who were the most important Jewish thinkers? Who were the ones who revolutionized? This is post Rabbi Soloveitchik. This is post Rev Hutner and some of the leaders and the lights of the previous generation. In this generation, who are the leaders of modern Jewish thought? Modern Jewish thought. And I would submit that if not the most important person, of the most important people, is someone named Rev Shagar, which is for Scholem Gershon Rosenberg, Zatzal. He died a little bit young, and he was one of the great thinkers in the religious Zionist movement. And his works are so fascinating because it combines the idealism of Rev Kook with the practicality of living in Israel through the Yom Kippur War and the Six-Day War, and really seeing the reality of what the state of Israel has become. And he writes as follows, and it's really interesting. HaTorah nitnar b'midbar v'lo be'eretz Yisroel. The Torah was given in the desert and not in the land of Israel. Look who he quotes. Noeg hayalomar harav Shach Zatzal. He quotes Rav Shach, who is the leader of the Haredi community. Shows you kind of the breadth of Rav Shagar, who he calls upon in dialogue within his works. They're all so fascinating. He brings in philosophers. He sometimes brings in movies and has them in dialogue with contemporary Jewish thought. If you're not familiar with his thought, this is a great time to open up a window, not literally right now in the middle of the class, but right afterwards, and go down the Rav Shagar rabbit hole. But he quotes Rav Shach and he says, "Lefila mala mishnos dor ein lo Yehudi moledes." It's been for generations, the Jewish people do not have a homeland. Why is that? Moladeto hi haTorah. Our homeland is the Torah itself. Shorashav b'shamayim v'lo al haaretz. That it kind of has this heavenly place that transports the Jewish people rather than a concrete land. Now, obviously, Rav Shagar does not center this completely as somebody who is a deeply avowed religious Zionist. He believes that the home of the Jewish people is the land of Israel. So we will see and return to this. How does Rav Shagar understand this question of why the Torah was specifically given in this transitional period before we enter and conquer the land of Israel, and after we leave the land of Egypt, we have this middle desert period, and that's when the Torah is given. The Abarbanel wants to know, why wasn't it given in Egypt? Just give it earlier. Like, let the cat out of the bag. Your kids get into the car and you say, where are we going? You don't want to say, wait and see. You'll see when we get there. They'll go crazy the whole trip. Why not give us the Torah? Tell us where we're going with this. So in order to understand this, I want to open up the world of Franz Kafka and who he was. I'm not going to go through an entire biography of Kafka, but he was living in this period of modern upheaval where right after the Enlightenment swept through Europe, right after we were given the freedom to build our lives as Jews as we saw fit. We were not forced into ghettos. We were not forced into specific jobs. We were not forced into specific communities. We really had freedom of movement that we had not experienced in Europe for centuries. And now this was the norm. And the question in this moment is, what of Jewish identity? That is really the question in many ways that Kafka is contending with. What you will see with Kafka is how he contends within his writing, within his novels. How do we contend with an unchosen identity? Our Jewish identity, if you think about it for a moment, is not a chosen identity. We have many chosen identities. We choose our profession, we choose our spouse, we choose our community. You cannot choose to be Jewish. Now, before you write in the chat, what about a convert? A convert takes the step. It is not a unilateral agreement. And once a convert converts, they are now a full-fledged Jew. They can't choose it either. It's not an ongoing. You can't save your receipt and 30-day money-back guarantee. Judaism and Jewish identity is Hotel California. There's only a doorway in and there's no doorway out. That is why Jewish identity, particularly in the modern era, when modernity is sweeping through Europe, and the characteristic feature, what did it mean to be modern during the time Kafka lives? Kafka is living in the end of the 1800s, the beginning of the 1900s. It's this opening up of this cosmopolitan Europe where to be modern meant to make a life of your own choosing, to build a life of your own design, that you were born into this world a blank slate, and you now are the artist that gets to sketch out how your life is going to unfold. And yet the question for the Jewish community that we are still contending with in many ways is what does modernity mean in a world where we have choice? What does unchosen obligation mean in a modern world of choice? And you will see this is the question that haunts and runs kind of like a shadow over all of Kafka's writing. Kafka had a novel, a short story called The Trial. And it opens up in a very classical Kafka way in the middle of a story. The opening sentence, which is quite famous, begins, "Someone must have slandered Joseph K. For one morning, without having done anything truly wrong, he was arrested." The entirety of the short story is this epic of Joseph K. feeling like he is being pursued, that he is being chased, and he does not know why. He needs to come before the law. He needs to seek justice, and he doesn't know what his wrongdoing is, and he doesn't know how to come before the law. If you look later on in the trial, you see the bewilderment of, I don't know where to go right now. Look at the next quote. "In front of the law, there is a doorkeeper. A man from the countryside comes up to the door and asks for entry. But the doorkeeper says he can't let him in to the law right now. The man thinks about this and then asks if he'll be able to go in later on. That's possible, says the doorkeeper, but not now. The gateway to the law is open as it always is, and the doorkeeper has stepped to one side. So the man bends over and tries to see in. When the doorkeeper notices this, he laughs and says, 'If you're tempted, give it a try. Try and go in, even though I say you can't. Careful, though. I'm powerful, and I'm the lowliest of all the doormen. But there's a doorkeeper for each of the rooms, and each of them is more powerful than the last. It's more than I can stand just to look at the third one.' This is the experience of someone who feels locked out of a room, banging on the door, hoping to be let in, and he doesn't even know why. He doesn't even know what he is so desperately seeking, but he knows he wants in. This is the experience of modernity. When you're handed the keys to your own life, when you are handed the keys to build your life as you want, you don't know what to do with them. I said this week, a feature of modernity is having really great answers to really bad questions. A lot of what modern life has become right now is we have these really great answers, but the questions are really bad. The questions are, what's a more convenient way to order a taxi? Or convenient ways to watch streaming video? But the underlying question that we had before modernity and after modernity, which is the very purpose of existence, we still haven't made that much headway on. And this is what Kafka was noting. Kafka was noting, with all of my freedom, I don't know where to go. I don't know where I don't know what I should do with this freedom. You know, it's interesting. Rav Menachem Froman, my friend, Rav Joey Rosenfeld, mentioned this to me. Rav Menachem Froman actually opened up a yeshiva with Rav Shagar. The name of the yeshiva was called, I think, Siach. I may have that wrong, but anyways, Rav Froman one time said, excuse me, that Rabbi Nachman of Breslov had a pen name, and the pen name of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov was Franz Kafka. He was noting the fact that if you read a lot of Rabbi Nachman's stories and the way that they contend with the absurdity of life, Franz Kafka's stories have a lot of parallels. In fact, no less than two books, one book and one PhD, have been written comparing Rabbi Nachman and Kafka. My friend Rabbi Joe Yossela Kanofsky wrote a PhD comparing Kafka and Rabbi Nachman, and there's another book named by Roger Kamenetz, which is an entire book that compares the storytelling of Kafka and Rabbi Nachman. Perhaps Kafka's most famous story is his book Metamorphosis, which some of us may have been forced to read in 10th grade, that has a really interesting opening premise. The opening premise, which is part of what Kafka is known for, that opening sentence, the same as the trial of Joseph K. getting whisked away to be arrested for a crime he didn't know he committed, Kafka begins the metamorphosis in a similar way. As Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from uneasy dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a gigantic insect. I mean, the way he explains this premise, it screams of someone who is contending with an identity they did not choose. It screams of somebody who feels that that their own past has a claim on them that they did not sign up for. This is what has become known as Kafkaesque. Kafkaesque is a word in the dictionary. You can open up Webster's. It's an adjective. It describes those situations where you feel your own aliveness because you are reflecting on the absurdity of your own life. You're looking around and saying, this is so ridiculous. You can imagine somebody who goes online at the DMV and it takes them 5 hours to finally get to the DMV line, and then there's nobody at the booth, and then finally when somebody comes there, they look at you and say, I'm going on my lunch break, and you're on the wrong line. You have nothing left to do but laugh. I mean, you're just like, this is absurd. This is crazy. Something is off. You feel missing. You feel unwhole. This is really something Kafka wrote about quite a bit, and that's the final quote that has always captured me on page 2. At the very bottom, Kafka, writing about redemption, said, "The Messiah will come only when he is no longer necessary. He will come only on the day after his arrival. He will come not on the last day, but on the very last day." What Kafka felt is that the waiting is really the main part of this experience. We don't have a savior who is coming to save us from this. We saw what modernity did to society. It didn't give us the keys. It didn't open up the doorway. We're still lost. We're still imprisoned because it's a prison of our own making. Like Kafka one time wrote in his diaries, he says, I feel like a cage in search of a bird. I feel like a cage in search of a bird. He was looking for purpose in his life. And very often the place where Franz Kafka turned to find purpose, not always, was his Jewish identity. If you look on the bottom left side, I can make it quite a bit bigger because I don't think you could see it that small. But on the bottom right side, you can see a kind of crude, not terrible, but kind of crude Hebrew handwriting. This is from Kafka's handwritten diaries. Kafka learned Hebrew. Kafka actually had a fascinating Hebrew tutor named Yuri Langer. Yuri Langer was a whole nother class. You could Google him, go down that rabbit hole. He wrote a book about Kabbalah and sexuality. He was a Babaver Chassid who went on his own really wild journey. He was Kafka's Hebrew teacher, but Kafka really wanted to learn Hebrew, and he really had hopes of going to the land of Israel. Now, let me stop right now for one moment. I'm going to take, not just a breath, but let me take one moment to stop the share. Hold on. How do I stop the share? I don't know how to do that. Maybe I won't stop the share. Oh, now I know how to stop share. Okay, I'm stopping the share for one moment. I always feel like it's more chaotic when you're sharing. And just a moment without sharing, just to introduce the next part of this. So Kafka has this idea of feeling the absurdity of life, of feeling the suffocation of your own existence, of that Kafkaesque feeling that we spoke about, of being pursued, of having someone have a claim on you that you did not choose. You don't even know why you are guilty. There was another scholar, not Franz Kafka, who lived years after Kafka. They overlapped a little bit. They never met. And his name was Gershom Scholem. Gershom Scholem is famous because he really created a new discipline of academic studies, namely the study of Jewish mysticism. He wrote his PhD on mystical language in the Bahir, I believe, and he became world famous for his works, his biography, and his later research on the Sabbatean movement. He wrote the biography on Shabtai Tzvi. I have it behind me. Should I do this? This is a terrible idea, but I'm doing it here. You can see my bookcases. I'm going to go to my Kafka shelf. 1 second. This is the Kafka shelf. You can see, kind of this is this Kafka shelf. And where's, oh, here. There's a Kafka shelf. This is Kafka's big book on Shabtai Tzvi. Okay, that was a terrible, terrible idea. I apologize to everyone. I should not have tried that, but we're giving a share on Zoom. Like, why not make it interesting? Why not? Why not? Why not introduce a little risk into the equation? Gershom Scholem had an idea that he wrote in a letter to a world famous publisher, and later became a world famous publisher named Zalman Schakin. Zalman Schakin, who later there's something called Schakin Press, which it happens to be my cousin and dearest mentor and friend, Alti Karper, was the editor of and ran Schakin Press for many, many years. Schakin is named after Zalman Schakin, and Zalman Schakin was a publisher and a philanthropist. And Gershom Scholem wrote to him with the idea of studying mysticism, Jewish mysticism. And how did he explain to Zalman Schakin why is mysticism important? Why is this necessary? Every time that Gershom Scholem was justifying his initial decision to study mysticism, his idea of why mysticism is relevant for modernity, the figure that he invokes as the embodiment of modern Jewish mysticism in this secular modern world is Franz Kafka. I want to show you this letter, and you will see why Kafka was not only a great writer of short stories, but in many ways was emblematic and was a paradigm of everything that Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah is about and contending with. This is from an article. The words on the page over here are written exactly by Gershom Scholem, but I got these snippets from a wonderful article called Gershom Scholem's Readings of Kafka, Literary Criticism and Kabbalah, which was written by Stephanie Moses and later translated by my teacher and a former guest of 1840, Ora Wiskin-Elper. And this is what Gershom Scholem writes to explain why mysticism is relevant now. Thus, mystical exegesis, I'm in the left-hand column, this new revelation imparted to the mystic has the character of a key. The key itself may be lost, but an immense desire to look for it remains. In a day when such mystical impulses seem to have dwindled to the vanishing point, they still retain an enormous force in the books of Franz Kafka. And the same situation prevailed 17 centuries ago among the Talmudic mystics, one of whom left us an impressive formulation of it. In his commentary on the Psalms, Origen quotes a Hebrew scholar, presumably a member of the Rabbinic Academy in Caesarea, as saying that the Holy Scriptures are like a large house with many, many rooms, and that outside each door lies a key, but it is not the right one. To find the right keys that will open the doors, that is the great and arduous task. To create a real feeling of an encounter with God in a world that is apparently absent of divinity is both the project of Kabbalah and in many ways the feeling and the exasperation that animates Kafka's writing. Gershom Scholem knew that Kafka did not study Kabbalah, and I am not suggesting that. What Gershom Scholem was saying is that there is something emblematic of Kafka's writing, the intensity and the urgency of the search to find existential meaning, the urgency and the reality of feeling unwhole in this world. Even when you have all the options, even when you could decide to build your life any way you want, but still feel as if something is missing, the one who captures that feeling the best is Kafka, and before Kafka, it was Kabbalah. So what Gershom Scholem is arguing is that Kafka captures the question that ultimately Kabbalah answers. And then in another writing, he says something even more fascinating. And he connects Kafka's writing and worldview to the town where he came from, namely Prague. And he says it can't be a coincidence that he came from Prague because Prague was the hotbed of all Sabbatean activity. And he feels that that Sabbatean impulse to find messianic revelation, even when it is not yet there, to be able to look into the void of reality and still be able to find or insist on finding revelation, is something that connects both Kafka and the Sabbateans. This is what he writes. It's wild. 100 years before Kafka in Prague, Jonas Well penned through his son-in-law Lo von Honigsberg letters and writings that were never published, but were assiduously collected later on by his Frankist disciples. He wrote for the last of the adepts of a Kabbalah distorted by heresy, a nihilistic messianism that sought to speak the language of enlightenment. He is the first to ask, and I'll be honest, I love this question, the following question. When Adam was banished from paradise, wasn't the prime victim of that expulsion not man, but paradise itself? This aspect of the problem has been largely neglected until now. Is it the sympathy of kindred souls that inspired Kafka a century later with thoughts so strangely similar? Perhaps it's because we do not know what happened to paradise that he asks himself why the good is in a sense desolate. Such reflections truly seem to have emerged from some heretical Kabbalah. For Kafka knew better than anyone else how to express that boundary where nihilism and religion meet. That's a very important line in Gershom Scholem's writing. The boundary where nihilism and religion meet. That's the same boundary that Rabbi Nachman talks about in the second volume of Likutei Maharan, in the 11th chapter, 11th or 12th chapter, where Rabbi Nachman says the beginning of religiosity is the cry of nihilism, of saying, where is the meaning? Aye makom kavoda, where is the divinity? That's the boundary where nihilism and religion meet. The moment that you hit nihilism, the moment that you say it can't be, this world is devoid of meaning, it's impossible. That's where the nihilism, the confrontation with the absurd, transforms into a religious impulse. And after Kafka, after Gershom Scholem writes this, he actually wrote an entire poem based on Kafka's writings. This is wild. This is a poem, if you look on, again, we're on page 3. There are only 4 pages, so nobody panic. We're really going to try to finish this in time. We might skip a source or two, but you can read them on your own. This is a poem that Gershom Scholem presents his interpretation of Kafka in greatest detail. I just want to read it to you. It's fairly moving. Are we totally separated from you? Is there not a breath of your peace, Lord, or your message intended for us in such a night? It's basically asking, like Rabbi Nachman, Aye makom kivoda, where are you, God, in this modern world? Can the sound of your word have so faded in Zion's emptiness, or has it not even entered this tragic realm of appearance? The great deceit of the world is now consummated. Give then, Lord, that he may wake who was struck through by your nothingness. Your trial began on earth. Does it end before your throne? You cannot be defended as no illusion holds true here. The creature or yourself, if anyone should ask you, you would sink into silence. Can such a question be raised? Is the answer indefinite? Oh, we must live all the same until your court examines us. You can read the article that I include on the source sheet for an in-depth literary analysis of this poem, and you can see on your own even how he kind of calls in Kafka and Kafka's writing in this poem by Gershom Scholem. But what Scholem feels Kafka captured is that foundational question of that initiation, that precipitory cry of saying, where are you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Where are you? Like, what is happening? Why does the world seem at some points so devoid of clear meaning, purpose, and divinity. What is so fascinating is that Gershom Scholem uses this specifically as an introduction to Kabbalah. Because what Scholem felt, and I'm taking it off screen share for a moment, what Scholem felt is that the question of Kafka is the same question that Kabbalists contended with and ultimately answered in their writings. He described Kafka as a secular Kabbalist who is rendering the experience that Kabbalah means to address, rendering it into the language of storytelling. Now, okay, I want to come back to our original question. We have a little bit less than 10 minutes. I definitely don't want to go overtime, and I could stick around if there are questions. But let's come back. I want to come back to Rev Shagar. And Rev Shagar, I believe, is the one who responds to some of the ideas or almost defeat that Gershom Scholem felt was apparent in Kafka's conception of this question. You know, Gershom Scholem was very influenced by Kafka and Sabbatianism, and he felt an overwhelming silence in the world. He really wanted to hear God more clearly. And he was worried in many ways that we would replace that search for a God with the presence of a country. And he was worried that Zionism would essentially mute and almost annihilate the messianic impulse. And he was worried about this. He wanted to make sure that that impulse, that longing, and that hoping remained even after we established a state. I believe it's Rev Shagar who best explains this, which returns us back to our question of why the Torah was given specifically outside of Israel. Rav Shagar has a beautiful essay that this is a continuation of that we start at the beginning, where he talks about the significance of Hatikva. And he writes that the song Hatikva is different than every other national anthem, in that the song of Hatikva is not a song of liberation and victory. It is almost a song of longing and hope. And what Rav Shagar explains is the majesty of the state of Israel is that we were able to preserve our longing even after the state of Israel was established. Even after it was established, we're still continued longing for a better iteration of our state, a better iteration of our country. We're always longing, and that can never be extricated from the Jewish people. And this, I believe, is the response, or is almost the answer that Kafka knew to our original question. And it is, in fact, Kafka himself who addresses this question explicitly in his diaries. Kafka writes in his diaries on June 19th, he's talking about the figure of Moshe Rabbeinu. And he writes, how can it be that Moshe Rabbeinu died before he entered into the land of Israel? He says he's on the track of Canaan all his life. It is incredible that he should see the land only when on the verge of death. The dying vision of it can only be intended to illustrate how incomplete a moment is human life. Incomplete because a life like this could last forever and still be nothing but a moment. Moses fails to enter Canaan not because his life is too short, but because it is a human life. I believe in these words, Kafka is getting to the same point as Shagar and his understanding of Hatikva. The reason why the Torah was not given in the land of Israel is because we did not want the Torah to be shaped by a destination. We wanted the Torah to be shaped by a journey. We wanted the consummate characteristic with which we accepted the Torah to be the characteristic of longing and not completion. The Torah ends on an incomplete note because it is specifically meant to address the underlying character of human existence and our own humanity. And it's our own humanity where redemption and exile, where suffering and joy are all intermingled. It is the humanity of Torah that it ends specifically on such an unfulfilled note. And this is really at the heart of what Kafka's writing is all about. There's an article that I will never apologize for quoting too often because I find it so moving and so comforting. It's an article by David Foster Wallace, who was an educator and a writer who wrote for Harper's Magazine in 1998 about the experience of teaching Kafka on the college level. And he writes about why it's hard to teach Kafka and his brand of absurdist comedy to college students. And this is what he writes. And it is this, I think, that makes Kafka's wit inaccessible to children whom our culture has trained to see jokes as entertainment and entertainment as reassurance. It's not that students don't get Kafka's humor, but that we've taught them to see humor as something you get, the same way we've taught them that a self is something you just have. No wonder they cannot appreciate the really central Kafka joke, that the horrific struggle to establish a human self results in a self whose humanity is inseparable from that horrific struggle. If you haven't paid attention to anything I have said this entire night, I would ask you to tune in for the next sentence, because it might be the most beautiful and profound sentence I have ever read. That our endless and impossible journey toward home is in fact our home. That our endless and impossible journey toward home is in fact our home. It's hard to put into words up at the blackboard, believe me. You can tell them that maybe it's good they don't get Kafka. You can ask them to imagine his art as kind of door, to envision us readers coming up and pounding on this door, pounding and pounding, just like Kafka writes about in his own books. Not just wanting admission, but needing it. We don't know what it is, but we can feel it, this total desperation to enter, pounding and pushing and kicking. That finally the door opens, and it opens outward. We've been inside what we wanted all along. Das is comic. That is Kafka. Kafka is the idea of being able to find a home within the struggle, that endless journey toward home. That the Torah was given deliberately before we entered the land of Israel to emphasize that the characteristic through which we perpetuate the Torah and our very Jewish identity is through that perpetual longing. A longing that always has to be uninterrupted, can always be for the next iteration, but a longing that never ends. It is always incomplete because the hallmark of humanity is our own incompleteness. The hallmark of our own story is that it never ends with a neatly tied bow, with an obvious story arc and a beginning and a middle and an end. And being able to find meaning in that world is precisely what makes us most human. And that, I believe, is what Rashi intended with the final Rashi in the entire Torah. How does the Torah end? The final words of the Torah are Ulechol Hayad HaChazaka Ulechol HaMorah HaGadol Asher Asa Moshe Le'enei Kol Yisrael. It is talking about the miracle working that Moshe did before the eyes of the Jewish people. What miracle is this referring to in that final Rashi in the entire Torah that we are going to celebrate this coming Shavuos? Rashi says, Shenasu libo lishbor haluchos le'enehem. It is referring to the shattering of the luchos before the eyes of the Jewish people, and God's response saying, Ve'eshabram le'enechem ve'heskima das HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'daito. God said, good idea. Break the written word. Break the luchos. Asher shibarta, yasher koach sheshibarta. It is good that you broke them. Why does Rashi end on a note that recalls one of the darkest times in Jewish history after we sin with the golden calf? Because the very nature of that sin and what it was all about, that over-reliance on leadership, that over-reliance on the tangibility of a HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the tangibility of a God that we can confront. And instead, Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to teach the Jewish people the same thing that Kafka is teaching us tonight on his yard site. And that is that the ultimate home is ultimately internal. The ultimate revelation is the one that occurs within us. It's not on the luchos, it's not the golden calf, and it's not any other thing that we try to make tangibility so we feel less alone in the overwhelming silence of modernity. Instead, the Torah gives us the confidence to say that there is still revelation and is unfolding within my own life, within my own spirit. I never have to feel overwhelmed or suffocated by the absurdity of the world because my very existence is a testament to revelation. My ability to understand and appreciate the excruciating absurdity that life sometimes feels like is a testament to the insistence of a divinity, of a life that makes sense. And that's the divinity that continues to exist inside of us. And that's the longing that we all have and that we ultimately celebrate on Shavuos. Shavuos, we got that first set of luchos, the set of luchos that were broken. They were eventually replaced on Yom Kippur. What are we celebrating on Shavuos? We're celebrating the question. That's why Shavuos is a holiday that emphasizes lachem, our humanity and our own experience, our own phenomenology of paying attention to our own questions, our own sense of revelation, and being able to find meaning and purpose in the overwhelming silence of modernity. Should be an Eloi Nishmas to our teacher, Franz Kafka, wishing everyone really from the bottom of my heart an uplifting and joyful Shavuot. I'm happy to stick around for questions. I don't know if that is normally done, but it is really a privilege and pleasure to share Torah with you so soon before before Shavuos and celebrate the yahrzeit of one of my favorite thinkers, Franz Kafka. Questions? No? Good?
Thank you very much, Rabbi Bashevkin, and thank you all for joining us at this series. Chag Sameach.
Thank you, friends. Be well.